Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to be with you again. I hope you and yours are well. Been a heck of a week, lots to talk about, lots to discuss. So let's get the panel in right away. We won't have our Phil with us today. He's stuck somewhere between Cologne and Brussels and is unable to join us tonight, but we'll have him back soon enough. But I do have there over in Old Reekie our Lloyd Quinnan.
Howdy, Roddy.
Quinnan, how are you doing?
I'm fine, absolutely fine. Haven't
Good.
banged
No
my head
cuts
today.
in the head tonight. No arguments with trees. That's the ticket. And up in Clickmannanshire, our favourite lawyer, it's our Eva. Eva, how you doing?
Hi, Roddy. Yeah, good. Looking forward to another happy show with plenty of interesting things to talk about because once more, it's been one hell of a week. Oh,
yeah. And we don't have Phil, but we do have a surprise guest, a special guest. And it's Sally Hughes, the independent for independence candidate for Perth and Rossshire. And Sally, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism.
Delighted to be here.
Great to have you. Good. I hope you enjoy this because we've got lots to talk about. Let's kick off. I mean, what could the point? Let me think. What was a big story this week? Could that be the arrest and charging, Lloyd, of the ex-CEO of the Scottish National Party, Peter Morrell, charged with embezzlement and SNP finance probe, which to Humza, who Humza used to say it came as a huge shock to everyone in the SNP. It didn't come as a shock to me. I think to most people in Scotland. Did it come as a shock to you?
It didn't come as a shock to me, but I can't help be shocked by the fact that the Scottish National Party in government for the past 10, 15 years has come to this position because of the actions of certain individuals. I think there's some real soul searching to be done for members of the Scottish National Party over this. Whatever the outcome is, there's no question that the structures put in place within the party post 2014 have not been to the benefit of either the internal democratic structures or to the benefit of the country. You have to be a bit sad when the ex-chief executive and current husband of the former First Minister has been charged with embezzlement when he was the chief executive officer of the leading organisation in the independence movement. There has to be an element of sadness about that, but also the only way we really get anything out of this is this has to be a absolutely thorough investigation. And if it results in prosecutions, then those people should be prosecuted in the full manner of the law, to allow the ordinary, decent people of the Scottish National Party to be able to rebuild their party, if that is possible after this debacle.
Yeah, Eva, 3 years Operation Branchform was going. A lot of us thought that it was going to go nowhere, it was going to peter out. And I understand that a lot of these types of cases, or legal, are quite complicated, and that's why it can take so long. But this might not be the end of arrests.
Well, we have to obviously be very careful in the context of contempt of court, etc., and the remarks that we make. And we might want to think about what else might develop from here. And I understand that there has been some word today from some top lawyers to the effect that if there is indeed a prosecution, the trial may not take place until as far away as 2026. So there's a long way still to go. And that would suggest to me that perhaps there will be other people in the frame. It's not difficult to speculate about who they might be when you consider obligations that there are, for example, to the Electoral Commission and to those other people who were previously arrested, although, as far as we're aware, have not yet been re-arrested. And obviously, we don't know whether that's in contemplation. But I actually felt really sad because these controversies in the SNP, like Lloyd has said, are sad for the genuine people who are there. And it would be good for the sake of Scotland to see the party rebuilt and become, I suppose, as good a party as it was in the olden days, if you like. But what I think is dreadfully unfair, actually, is looking today on the eve, because we're recording this on Friday, on the eve of the Believe in Scotland march and rally, when there will be a lot of decent independent supporters in attendance. We've got Humza Yousaf, obviously the current First Minister. He'd been Alex Salmond's protégé. He was quite clearly Nicola Sturgeon's protégé. He's been a cabinet minister in a number of different roles. And there he was tonight, probably thinking that he's almost fighting for his political future as the result of events which, if they occurred, he was not directly responsible for, but they're having a major impact on his position as First Minister. And Saturday was meant to be a celebration of independence, with people looking forwards to where our country could go. And to see that there is such a mire and such a dreadful mess around what was and still is the leading party of the independence movement, as Lloyd says, is really most unfortunate. And quite frankly, the people of Scotland deserve better. So I do a wee bit of advice for Humza, actually. If he wants to divert attention away from all the hassles that there have been in recent days and weeks and months, the best way to do that is to launch an independence campaign, because he'll find then that Lloyd and Sally and I and you too, Roddy, and hundreds of thousands of others will be foursquare behind him, regardless of the difficulties that his party faces. So maybe this weekend is indeed the time to launch the Constitutional Convention and get all the old heads and the new ones round the table together and start plotting our country's future and stop dwelling on the past.
Here. I'll be on the first plane, Humza. I'll be there. Just do it. Sally, of course, a lot of people are going to say it's false and it's a British state and it's the spooks, and that's the easy one for them to say. But the fact of the matter is, there was a ring-fence fund. There have been 3 years of investigations. You were a police officer. You know how difficult these investigations are. And the police and the Crown Prosecution Service wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't if they didn't have good cause.
If I lift out of this, the particulars of this, and speak more generically, where you have any organisation that has a constitution, there's only 2 or 3 people who have access to the bank account, particularly for very large sums of money, and they have to sign for it. And particularly when there's paperwork in the public domain saying what that money was raised for, the purpose that money was raised for, it's not as extensive an inquiry as you would think, because there's really only half a dozen or a dozen people at most to interview. You need a warrant to seize and obtain the documents, particularly if they're on a computer. But so I'm actually, without getting into conspiracy, what concerns me that it's taken 3 years to get to here, right at the cusp of a general election, and I do detect the dead hand of the British estate there. I'm not, I'm not upset that there is a prosecution perhaps likely to take place. I'm concerned that it's taken 3 years to get here when it's such an important issue, and it goes to the heart of government corruption. So that worries me a great deal. I'm on a personal level and on a sort of Perth level, there are people high up politically who were considered the elder statesmen of the party that carried independence, the SNP. They were the elder statesmen, highly, highly respected, known as Honest John and the longest serving MP. They had a duty to make sure everything was, all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed, and that discrepancies of any kind that could bring the party and the movement into disrepute did not happen. It's shockingly bad that we ever got to this stage. Shockingly bad. And of course, the money's not there. It can't the easiest excuse, the easiest excuse at all when it is in the circumstances where it's been happenstance and a slight mistake is the money's still there, and it can be repaid, or it hasn't gone anywhere, so it hasn't been misused, but it's not there and can't do it. So, so if there's more than one person that could sign for it or grant permission for monies to go missing from any organisation for the wrong purpose, then there's the likelihood of more prosecutions in due course, because it's not rocket science, and no. They've either done it knowingly or acting out in part, or they've been negligent in preventing it from happening. So which would come out in evidence in the due course of a trial. So again, I think the timing of any potential further arrests is not in our hands, and will likely be dictated by what suits the British establishment, and what suits them from an election point of view. That's my gut feeling on it.
Okay, Lloyd, Sally's absolutely right. I mean, if you've got a political party or a political organisation, and a couple of people have gone rogue and spent the money without the knowledge and all the proper checks and balances put in place, that's a crime. It's wrong, and so I'm not so sure of the hand of the British state. I mean, I think the British state might be declaring timing to suit the British state. But this is a genuine case of something that needed investigated.
I don't think, genuinely, Roddy, I don't think this required the involvement of, spooks and men in raincoats and, spies under the bed and all that. I don't think it required that. I think what we had, unfortunately, was a number of people, senior in the SNP headquarters and headquarters staff particularly, who were not really properly aware of their responsibilities to A, the membership, and B, to the Electoral Commission and the other regulatory bodies that they're supposed to know the rules of. And I also think, more importantly, I don't think there was a real, when the rules on the elections to the National Executive Committee were altered, and when the ascension of the interest groups directly onto the National Executive Committee, I don't think it was properly explained to these people exactly what their responsibilities are as members of the supreme decision-making body of the party. Now, they wouldn't understand they were part of the supreme decision-making body of the party, because they always just did what they were told by who they believed was the supreme body of the party, namely Nicola Sturgeon. Now, I think a lot of these people and their families are going to be deeply concerned here, because if there is, if it is found that in excess of £500,000 has effectively been frittered away by the SNP rather than being spent on what it was raised for, then it wouldn't be the wrong thing to think that the collective responsibility will require that money to be paid back. And if I was a member of the National Executive Committee, I would be seriously thinking about where I'm going to find that money from. But again, it shows the amateurism that there was in the party post-2014, where people thought it was part of getting on the gravy train was getting on the National Executive Committee. And in some ways that was true. And that was a failure to understand what the central and most important part of being on the National Executive Committee is to maintain the good governance and the good structures and the democratic structures of the party. I think there's some people in for a fright.
Absolutely. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I remember Douglas Chapman, who was elected as Treasurer, quickly said no because he wasn't getting access to the books. But Joanna Cherry as well, she warned the NEC people that they could be held liable for any losses. If the money was had to be repaid, the people in the NEC could be held responsible. I remember that, do you?
Oh yeah, I remember that quite clearly, and it's as Lloyd has said, that's what it's about. It's about accountability. You're there on the National Executive Committee to run the party, and it's not about perks. It's about liability and accountability. So I think the wider NEC may all be quite alarmed as events develop. And it's a difficult set of circumstances, but we can only hope that investigations are done properly, and if there are prosecutions or there are trials, that those are done, fully, properly, and that justice prevails. So we need to say and do nothing to jeopardise any of that. But I think that what is becoming a stain on the body politic and on the independence movement is something that really needs to have the proper sunlight that you get when there are effective investigations and people are held accountable. So we'll see where it goes over the course of the next wee while. But it would be good for the independence movement to become cleansed of this.
Absolutely.
Those who are within the SNP and other parties that are not part of the difficult set of circumstances that party is in should be talking about the unity of the movement rather than perhaps dwelling too much on the past.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great. I mean, I think your previous comment about now's the time for the Constitutional Convention is absolutely right. If there is British influence, that would certainly deflect it away. But overall, this week has not been a good week for the reigning government in Scotland, Sally, because another thing was the Scottish government resisted calls to have a ministerial statement on the caste review from England, and they just absolutely blanked it. Now, it's a very important subject for what's going on, and the government ran away from it. Again, it's not a good look.
It's a dreadful, dreadful look, because you're talking about child protection. And Eva will know more than me, but in my past, I've had to look on a personal level at potentially taking legal action against my doctors, and I had to read up on the subject. And one of the first things you see is, because Western medicine is a field of expertise that crosses all country boundaries, lawyers and judges at the highest level are quite prepared to look across borders into other countries, into other continents, if a medical procedure has already been taken to court and argued in court at the highest level. And I mean, they won't adopt that particular law, but if a principle has been established, they're quite happy to give that some of the stage within the trial that takes place here. And I think the caste review is highly likely to result in legal action for compensation and damages done to some of these former patients, or still patients now, but in different ways. And you just have to ask yourself, where's the decency? And where's the ministerial sense of responsibility? They're just hiding. They're sticking their heads in the sand, and it beggars belief until you see just how much money is behind the scenes in this, in terms of being driven by the big pharmaceutical companies. And in America, they admit it's likely to be a $10 billion dollar a year industry within the next decade.
Yeah.
And that level of money has power, and unfortunately, it's not necessarily benevolent power, and it crosses continents too. So, but you'd really just have to say, where's the integrity with our public servants and just where's the common decency? Because they must have kids, they must have people that they love, that they say, well, hang on a minute, that's not right. Where's the checks and balances and the due diligence, and where's the bravery of the doctors in this as well? I say in my brochure, for my leaflet for standing as a candidate, that so much of everything is broken just now and not working the way it should. And this is perhaps one of the highest examples of that.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, indeed. But even here's the other thing. Down in England, they closed the Tavistock Up here, the Scottish Government is resisting any likelihood of closing down Sandyford Clinic. I mean, they've rejected it. They really are obsessed and believe that they're the only people that have got this right, despite all the evidence. The cognitive dissonance is incredible.
Aye. They're in for an awful shock, because I think round the doors, I think the public, the grassroots public from every political spectrum, left and right and in the middle, they've had enough. And
absolutely, they have indeed, Sally. So, Eva, do you think that they should close down the Sandyford Clinic? Do you think they will close down the Sandyford Clinic? Will pressure build?
Pressure is building now, because obviously we had a position whereby the Scottish Government repeatedly refused to make a statement or be questioned about the cash review and its implications, and they also refused to make any announcement regarding the prescription of puberty blockers. We then discovered, after these refusals to make statements, and when other statements were made to the effect that the Sandyford Clinic works appropriately and well and that politicians wouldn't interfere in this, we then learned that about a month ago, medics at Sandyford, in consultation with Gregor Smith, the National Director, had decided to pause the prescription of puberty blockers for future patients. So there's been a lot going on behind the scenes that either the government knew about and withheld, or they were not sufficiently interested in to make themselves aware of developments at Sandyford. And, you know, this is part of a much bigger picture where you wonder how much is ignorance, how much is willful, how much is a lack of interest, and how much at times is a deliberate desire to allow what I consider to be a flawed and dangerous ideology to really take root in all our institutions. Because there's, you know, we've spoken here so many times about gender recognition reform, transgender guidance for schools, the charity LGBT Youth Scotland and related organisations, including Stonewall and the Discredited Mermaids. And the common denominator around all of this ideology seems to be a complete inability to understand, or an unwillingness or a refusal to understand, that children and teenagers can become troubled about their identity, and the right way to deal with it is what's called watchful waiting, and to seek expert assistance so that, as the cash review recommends, children and teenagers who are troubled are assessed holistically and individually, and that they're not set on a pathway, because it can become a generic pathway that becomes prescribed to all of those who cross the threshold. So what needs to be done here is that there needs to be an awful lot of money put into child and adolescent mental health services across the board. We know that a substantial number of children suffering from identity issues are on the autistic spectrum, and we know that very many of them have suffered traumatic experiences of all different sorts. And what it seems to me and to many others is the very worst thing to do is to affirm these children and start prescribing them puberty blockers the minute that they walk in the door, because that seems to have happened with far too many young patients to their long-term detriment. So I think that the appropriate thing to do is to pause entirely the gender identity service within Scotland for children and teenagers, and to employ the right people who are well qualified in child psychology and child psychiatry to make sure that our young people are appropriately assessed, and that they are not affirmed to believe that it's actually possible to be born in the wrong body, or that there is a miracle cure for a difficulty of that nature in the form either of medication that can halt puberty permanently, or in the form of what has been for far too many Scottish children, mutilating surgery, when it's been pretended that, for example, castration of a boy can turn him into a girl, or a double mastectomy of a girl can somehow make her more male. These are the things that have been going on, and it's high time that there was a proper investigation into what has happened in Scotland, including into all the charitable organisations and related organisations who have promoted this ideology, including in our schools. As a matter of interest, Roddy, you might have seen this. LGBT Youth Scotland says that it's an organisation that looks after LGBT children aged between 13 and adults of 25. It's been established very recently. LGBT Youth Scotland is now going into primary schools to speak to children there about identity issues. In my book, they have no place in primary schools, and I very much doubt whether they have a place in responsible secondary schools either.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, I find the whole thing quite ridiculous. Like, I mean, if someone, some poor person suffering from anorexia, it would be the equivalent of saying, you're right, you're fat, stop eating, keep dieting. Because they're encouraging people down a road that is harmful. And it is, that without consulting mental health experts, it's just wrong.
Absolutely. Eva touched on it there, and Sally's touched on it as well. There's a zealotry about this ideology that verges on it's similar characteristics to religious cults in some ways. You're either in the gang or you're out the gang. We have the protected knowledge. We know something. We are superior, and we see a lot of that, particularly in the young male trans rights activists who genuinely behave in a way not dissimilar to the Taliban in Afghanistan and fundamentalist Christians did during the witch hunts. It's, you are with us or against us, and if you're again, then you are a lesser being. Now, any ideology, any theory that bases itself on that, I mean, it's pretty close to fascistic. In fact, a good friend of mine described the whole gender recognition concept as a monetized fascist cult for middle-class mediocrities, and I think it pretty much summed it up totally. But the danger here is middle-class mediocrities tend to dig their heels in. They were the last people on the planet who will ever admit that they are wrong. And we have a civil service, which has been trained by Stonewall. We have BBC Scotland, which is trained by Stonewall. Our NHS, trained by Stonewall. Our police service, our fire service, trained by Stonewall. And I mean, I could go on for the entire time of the programme, in actual fact, because the level of involvement and the requirement to subscribe to Stonewall law, for want of a better description, but I would say, mad cult ideology, we are a bit closer to the mark. The demand for that has happened in this country since effectively Nicola Sturgeon opened the door for them and Leslie Evans opened the door to them in the Scottish Civil Service. So this has been going on for 12, 14 years maybe. This ideology is embedded at really deep levels, and each time you say we need to move this away, it turned itself into an industry. So we're not just talking about people having to admit that maybe they got it wrong or they went along with a mad idea and they've seen the light. You're actually talking about people who are going to have to say, well, actually, the job that I do is a product of this ideology. It serves no function or purpose other than to back up that ideology. So you better sack me. Now that ain't going to happen. This is going to take tough negotiation. It's also going to take a level of honesty that I currently do not believe exists in the higher echelons of the Scottish National Party, the civil service, the police service, the National Health Service, because it is now a job industry. It has become a total and complete industry. And I think it's going to require, I really believe this, I think it's going to require an independent, judge-led inquiry on the outside for a total and complete rethink of the leadership and management training that we use in our third sector, our public sector, and in our government.
No, I think we'll do need something, because the thing is, Eva, not content with having the GRRB bill stopped in its tracks by the British government, not the hate crime bill, which is floundering along and just absolutely horrific. And we've got the deposit return scheme, which has cost us now 80 million quid. We've got the bicycle fiasco. We've had laptops for kids, all this. But no, they're not content with screw-ups. We've got another one coming along, which is the Misogyny Act, where the Scottish government has said that it will cover trans women. Now, trans women are men. They are male. That's just a fact. So how can misogyny, if I'm not mistaken, is about being against women, female, adult human females. How can men be covered in this bill, Eva? I'm confused. Can you help me?
Right. Sex is a protected characteristic in terms of the Equality Act of 2010. However, it is not a protected characteristic in terms of the Hate Crime Act, despite the fact that when the hate crime, as it was then a bill, was going through the Scottish Parliament, numerous MSPs tried to get it amended to include sex. Probably the most famous who attempted that would be Joan McAlpine and Joanne Lamont. But the SNP particularly and the Greens were adamant that this was not to happen, that sex was not to be there. They suggested that putting sex in the Hate Crime Act would have been an adjunct or an add-on that somehow wasn't appropriate, and women would be better served by a separate offence of misogyny. And folk like me saw it coming that what would happen would be exactly this, that the crime of misogyny would also apply to men, when the dictionary definition of misogyny since time immemorial has been hatred of women. So misogyny ought not to apply to men, to males. However, things got even more ridiculous during the week when Humza Yousaf said something along the lines of, a man who was threatening to rape a woman wouldn't necessarily know if it was a woman or a trans woman. He went on to use the prefix of cis in his comments, and that is considered by many, including me, as a slur. There's no such thing as a cis woman, there's just women, because trans women are not women, they're men. I actually think that most men on the planet, if they were would be able to tell the difference. I think it's most likely that the difference would not be obvious. But you see where, once again, the SNP and the Greens have misjudged the public, and they've misjudged women and those decent men who stand up for women, is that, again, female territory is being overruled and overtaken and infiltrated by men. And the women of Scotland will not have it. We didn't wish before, and we're no wish now. It was actually offensive to hear some comparisons being made about whether a disabled woman of colour would have a triple sort of protection under some of this legislation. And if she did, then it wasn't fair that a trans-identifying male, a trans woman, didn't also have it. And you have to scratch your head and say, what the hell happened in this country? We were renowned for our education system. We had universities hundreds of years before many other European countries. And what have we got now? I don't know what the polite word is, because I want to use the word bastardised the meanings of normal words and phrases in the English language, to the extent where you have to think twice before you open your mouth, because words and vocabulary and meaning that you've known for 60 years of your life suddenly mean something entirely different. And this is because we are governed by clowns and fools who are incompetent, who are completely incapable of looking at the legislation of our country and asking themselves sensibly what needs to develop here and why. What is the purpose of this new legislation? Who is it designed to protect? What crime are we inventing? Or where is the criminal law currently a bit dodgy or a bit defunct and we need to revamp it? None of the legislation that you've seen from the SNP and the Greens has done any of that. All it's done is further embed this notion that they're not fit for purpose. And none of that is needed by the country. We need competent government. So again, a tip, get rid of the Hate Crime Act, reword your misogyny bill so that it relates to women only, and start thinking seriously about making laws that the people want and the people understand and that use common sense vocabulary and the ordinary everyday meanings of ordinary words.
Sally, you were a police officer for decades, although you only look 21. Silver-tongued devil, yeah. But I mean, here's this law that a man could be complaining to a police officer about a misogynistic comment made to them. It is absolutely ridiculous. What would a policeman do in that case? What do they do?
I dread to think because of the current climate that we're in. As you know, I went into the police station on the 1st of April to test the new hate crime law, and it was an old colleague of mine, and he went, "Sally, what are you doing to me?" So I says, "Go and phone up the stairs, see, and speak to the senior management, because I'm standing as an MP for election." So he did that, which was entirely the correct thing to do. And then a few days later, I went back, and he was on duty again. I had a different letter this time for the chief constable. He says, "Thank you so much for not mentioning my name." There's a real climate of fear, you know. But Eva hit the nail on the head in terms of legislation has to be understandable. It doesn't work if it's not understandable. There's a sort of geeky side to me when I was doing my policing. I quite liked some of the common laws in particular were really well written. There was an elegance to them. And some real thought had gone into human behaviour and the potential defences that people would try to get around the legislation by. The current legislation and the current government have absolutely, it's not even that they have zero skills and talents in this field, it's they have the negative talents in this field that they write gobbledygook that's incomprehensible and won't work. Just from a policing, particularly in a country where policing is done with the consent of the public, it has got to be grounded in decency, integrity, and common sense. And that's not been seen in a long time certainly in the last 5-10 years from this government. So, but in terms of to go back to misogyny, because I was hearing so much about this, transgender people are the most put upon wee souls in the universe. I had 25 years of policing on all of it on the beat, and I never once dealt with a hate crime aimed at a transgender person. And I was speaking to my colleagues that are retired as well. Did you? And I was asking, and no. And we'd all dealt with racially motivated crimes, not too much. I'm glad to say, and I'm sorry that it had happened, so we'd all dealt with domestics, if not every single day we were on duty, then certainly every set of shifts, and if we weren't dealing with it, someone else on the shift was dealing with it. So on that basis, I did a Freedom of Information request, and it covered 4 or 5 years up until 2019, because domestic incidents have an aggravation marker on the crime recording, and transgender have an aggravation marker. So anybody who's transgender, who is the victim of a crime, and it appears that that's been a motivation factor, that's also recorded, right? Mm-hmm. So for a country of our population, which is approximately the 5 million mark, for domestic abuse, whether it be assault or breach of the peace or vandalism, domestic abuse incidents, roughly speaking, you're talking between 60 and 65,000 throughout Scotland in a year, right? And of those, 80%, it's a female victim and a male accused or suspect. Perpetrator, yeah. Right, so... Right, for transgender markers, the average over those same 4 years was approximately 80 for the whole of Scotland. And I can assure you, not one of them was a murder or a rape, because it would have been front page news in view of the climate that we're at. Right, so, and as someone from Women Won't Wheesht, when I shared that detail, said, Sally, some of those will be hateful stickers, because the Marion Miller case was prevalent in 2019. Hateful stickers, or with a a green and a white and a purple ribbon tied to a tree, and big grown adult men who do bodybuilding were put in a state of fear and alarm about that. So we've gone through the looking glass, and we must rescue sanity here, and decency, and just plain old common sense, And one of the whole Stonewall infiltration and their ilk, before I left the polis in 2020, I had a quick look at the standing orders to look and see what the guidelines were, and it had been written by Stonewall. So it was impenetrable gobbledygook. That's the best, and I couldn't believe, and it not only was it gobbledygook, but it was quite plainly not legal. And we have the police have human resources staff who are fully qualified up in the do's and don'ts of employment law. And to give you an example of what this document said, and I wish I'm glad I didn't keep it, because I don't think it's healthy for your brain to have that stuff exposed too much. But what it said was there were terms that you could use, terms that were frowned upon, and terms that you absolutely could not use in terms of how you refer to people of gender fluidity. And you could no longer use the term homosexual, because in the past, people of a homosexual persuasion had been called bad names on the grounds that they were homosexual, and they'd been bullied or harassed and all the rest of it. So it was not exactly banned, but that was in the frowned upon, try not to use the term homosexual. Biological sex was also words that were no longer allowed to be used. But you could use the term lesbian, because of course lesbian women have never suffered any type of abuse with that word in history, So straight away, the whole document was biased against women of a lesbian persuasion, and you think, can these folk not see this? How do the senior management not just show them the door and thank them for their time and say, "Don't call us, we'll call you"? That's what they used to do. I mean, but they get money. The whole edifice, they lobby in order to get access behind the scenes to train up these institutions like the police, like the judges, like the schools, like the education board, and they get grants from the government to do it. And so the whole edifice is eating its own tail now. And we now have a series of middle management and senior management that don't have anything that's resembling a spine or an ounce of common sense, or even the ability to add up some legal facts and say, "Thanks for your time. There's the door. Won't call us, we'll call you."
Yep, well said. Can I just say to our viewers, Through a Scottish Prism has never had any Stonewall training, as you could probably tell by our weekly shows, and we're not likely to have either. Can I just quickly, it's a yes or no answer here, Sally. Did you ever get a reply to your letter asking about what we could or could not say that wouldn't be a hate crime?
I never got phoned by the police hate crime advisor, and given that they've had 9,000 complaints of hate crime incidents now, I suspect that's not going to happen, and it's probably fallen off the radar. I checked my PO box yesterday, and there's been no reply yet to my letter from the Chief Constable, but technically she has until the end of the month to do that, so I'll pick up at that point and pursue it further, because that letter's really rather important. I want answers.
Absolutely, it sure is. As I say, there's a lot going on this week, and I've got to say, Lloyd, not a lot of it's done Scottish National Party or whom's a lot of good. This is you highlighted in our midweek show as the 90th birthday of the Scottish National Party. Happy birthday to you. And they've become a wee bit senile. They seem to have dementia because they've forgotten why they're here and what their job is. Did you see the wee segue I did there, Lloyd? Impressed there? That was a wee segue, wasn't it? But as they do it, the question I want to ask you is, the way they're going, will they be here for their centenary?
Oh, a week's a long time in politics, I believe someone once said.
Yep.
You're tearing at me here, Roddy. You know, I'd love to see the SNP have a 100th anniversary if it was the SNP that I joined. That said very clearly on the tin,
Yep.
a majority of seats, a majority of votes, and we begin negotiations for our independence. I mean, as I've said before, the hardest day of my entire life as an activist for independence was the day of the 2015 Westminster election, when I saw a sight that I never believed I would ever see, which was us taking 56 out of the 59 seats. And it was the hardest day of my life because I knew we were going to do absolutely nothing about it. Yeah. Whereas when I joined the party at the age of 15, if that had happened in the election in 1974, the February or the October election, we would be independent now.
Yeah.
And if the SNP decides, you know, and this will be down to the membership, if they decide to change who's at the top, if they decide to re-educate themselves about the nature of what a national party should be and what a national movement should be, re-educate themselves about their own history as an organisation, then yeah, I'd love to see them 100 years. But if they don't do any of those things, then I'll be happy to see them in the bucket by Friday. Because, you know, there is nothing more devious, there is nothing more despicable than to dupe the people. And I know for a fact, and you do too, there are people senior in the Scottish National Party who are devolutionists. They do not believe in independence, but they will go to the electorate each and every election and proclaim that they are the supporters of independence, and they're not. And that, to me, is like I've said this a number of times as well. Don't lie in politics. Don't lie. That's the first crime. If you lie, you're in the wrong game. And for a party and senior party members to lie not only to their own membership but to lie to the electorate, to me, yeah, the bin of history unless they change. That's it.
Yeah. You too, Eva, were a long time SNP person. You know, 90th birthday, and they've failed in their mission so far. They shouldn't have, but they have. Do you see them making it to their centenary?
Well, I was actually at the 60th anniversary celebration, the official event in Edinburgh. And I think around about that time was it Ian Lawson and others that had launched the Challenge of the 90s financial campaign. Yeah. And by no stretch of the imagination did I think that we'd be here 30 years later and we're no further forwards. It's absolutely heartbreaking. What we do know, though, is that support for independence in Scotland is far higher now than it was 30 years ago, and that's the overwhelming difference. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the majority of the population of our country desire independence. All we need to do is to ensure that we elect politicians who will make that happen. So the SNP have still got time to change tack. The Greens have got time to change tack and put country before party. They know that's what they have to do. The reason they're not doing it, as we've said so many times before, is they lack courage, vision, determination, ambition, all that stuff. What they need to do is get back out on the streets and speak to the people who are really hurting and the people with vision who can see the powerhouse that Scotland would become. I'll not nick Sally's line from her leaflet because I'm dying to hear her say it herself. But today I was in the Sheriff Court in Alloa. I was in a couple of supermarkets in Alloa and had a drive around Clackmannanshire, and I'm broken-hearted when I see what's happening round about me. There are phenomenal sums of money being spent on cycle paths. They ought not to be a priority. We've spoken before about a couple of £100 million being spent nationally on cycle paths at the same time as the housing budget is reduced by a couple of £100 million.
Yeah.
Priorities of our politicians are skewed. If the SNP want Scotland to prosper, that will only happen when we have a better together approach to the independence movement in a constructive independence campaign. So, like Lloyd, I hope that the SNP becomes reinvigorated and it can become once more the party that fights Scotland's corner. If it doesn't do that very rapidly, it'll probably not exist come its 100th anniversary. It'll be a very, very minor shadow of its former glory if it's still there. And an awful lot of people who have fought for decades for our country's liberation to return our country to the status of normalcy, which independence is, will no longer be here. And I can't thole that suggestion. So I would say again to Humza Yousaf and those around him, get the finger out, pal, because we can do it this year if you so desire.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, that thing in the 60th anniversary in Lawson, he had a 32-inch waist and a head of hair at that time, if I'm not mistaken. I know Ian watches this, but you know, it's been a tough 30 years, Ian. It's been a tough 30 years, mate.
I was 5'7" and looked like a cross between Susie Quattro and Debbie Harry.
But unlike Ian, you weathered well, Eva. You weathered well. Yeah. Mr. Lawson won't be buying me a gin and tonic anytime soon. Yes, he will. But anyway, Sally, same question to you. Do you think the SNP will see their 100th anniversary?
I think when a political party or a politician, for that matter, ruins their integrity, I think they're done. I think they're a busted flush. I think a major problem for all the political parties is people have so many avenues now to do wee films of themselves with the mobile phones and Facebook and Twitter and I mean even technophobes like myself are managing to do that with help, it has to be said, thank goodness. But so the old stranglehold that a political party, I mean the best medium to get out and communicate with people is obviously a wee television stint, like a party political broadcast. Now, if they put a party political broadcast out now, who would see it? It really doesn't have the punch and essential weight that it used to have, because people are seeing wee clips of people hitting the nail on the head all the time now. So that is, in one respect, it's branched out more, but on the other hand, when it's something as essential as independence, it's actually returned it to the people. So I see more. I don't see the personalities within the SNP now to rescue it, and even there are 2 or 3 people who I still admire within the SNP, and my gut feeling is saying they should have stepped away in the last year or 2 out of integrity, because I don't see how you can stand up for women's rights and still belong to a party that tried to push through the Gender Recognition Act, that was standing, that, you know, allowed the cash report to have to be fought in the English courts and didn't do it here. These are things that, you know, where's your integrity? There has to be some red lines in the sand, and they missed them. They seem to think it was okay to say, well, you know, I'm down in Westminster, so I won't get the blame for that. Well, I'm afraid it doesn't work like that. I think they've missed the bus, and I don't think that bus will come their way again. Not in that form.
Correct. But what you have to do is make Eva's day, Sally. What we're going to do, what's the first thing we're going to do when we get independence?
We're going to put the heating back on.
Yes, we're going to put the heating back on. That's what we're going to do. There we go. Lloyd, Techie, could you stick up the video of the First Minister in campaign mode? Oh, this is going to get you going, Lloyd. You're going to be magnificent.
There's only one party that is by far the largest in advocating the cause of independence, and that is the SNP. And therefore, if you believe in independence, you want to advance the cause of independence, then I would urge people to vote for the SNP. To be clear, although we are in government, with the Greens. We are, to state the obvious, different political parties that will often compete for votes in a number of different elections. And therefore, yes, I think there's a real danger for those who believe in independence, believe in progressive values, that if you vote for the Greens, it could end up, of course, taking votes away from the SNP. And with the greatest of respect to my Green colleagues, they're not going to win a Westminster seat in Scotland. So therefore there is a danger of that. And I would say, look, this election presents us with a number of opportunities. We can ensure that we advance the cause of independence. I've already referenced. We can ensure there's no more Tory MPs in Scotland. And you can ensure that Scotland's voice is heard by Westminster. You only do that with a strong group of SNP MPs. Voting for another pro-independence party will possibly, has the danger of splitting that vote.
Phil's not here, but I might just do some swearing now, Lloyd. I've never heard so much bullshit in my life. It's the same old stuff over and over again. Only vote for us. This is the people that didn't want a Scotland United campaign. These are the ones that said, no, we're the ones and we'll do it. Now they're complaining because, one, he's only complaining about the Greens. He's not even having the courtesy of attacking Alapa or our independent for independence candidates. But it's the old story, you can only have us and we'll get rid of the Tories. We've done that before. We've been down that road. It's utter nonsense, Lloyd.
Yes, it is. But I think the only positive you could take out of it is maybe the fact that he didn't mention any of the other independent candidates or the other independent parties apart from the Greens. Maybe something sunk in that being associated with the Greens isn't the smartest thing in the world these days. And this is them attempting to distance it. But no, I'm sick to the back teeth of hearing new Labour slogans come out of the mouth of members of the Scottish National Party. This getting rid of the Tories is utter childishness. Scotland hasn't voted for a Tory majority since 1956, way back in the middle of the 20th century. We're a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Mm-hmm. For that to be the slogan of the Scottish National Party, as opposed to something positive about taking our country somewhere, and then in the next line of what he's saying is, but we're fighting for independence. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, Humza, you can't have it both ways, because there are people who are ideological conservatives, Tories, remembering that Tory actually comes from, right, well, that's a separate issue, but there are people who are ideologically conservative. You would call them, I would call them Tories, who believe Scotland should be an independent country. Now, where in Humza's Scotland do those people fit in? You know, what are we going to do? These people are all going to get exiled to Arran. The fact of the matter is, the leader of the Scottish National Party has to outline a vision of building a country, not of exclusion within a country. But then again, if you're the First Minister of Scotland and you believe that you live in a river of hate and a rising tide of hate, and that everything in this country is not what it could be in the ideal World Economic Forum pattern, then that's the kind of stuff you're going to come out with. But the most annoying thing about it is a member of the Scottish National Party, I hear him talk about independence only, either when he's asked about it or when there's an election coming. It's not something that naturally trips off the tongue for Mr. Youssef, in the same way as it never naturally tripped off the tongue of Miss Sturgeon. And unfortunately, I don't hear it tripping off the tongue of very many members of the current Scottish Cabinet. We have devolutionists in charge of the Scottish National Party, whether they're the elected ones or not. That's who's in charge, which is why the campaign is not about independence, Roddy. It's not about independence, Eva. It's not about independence, Sally. It's about keeping them in their salaries. It's about keeping them in business. They haven't spoken to normal people in 10 years, and there's nothing plainer than in the platitudes that they're trying to get across to their own membership initially, then across to the people, that they haven't had a conversation with a normal person in at least a decade, or they could not possibly come out with this guff. And that's all it is. It's utter and complete guff. And the sooner he heads off on maternity leave and does not return, the better it will be for this country. But what we need rid of is this new Labour mentality that exists and permeates right through the leadership of both the Westminster SNP group and the Scottish Government SNP group.
Not very well I'm going, Lloyd, but she's going to replace them. That's the problem. Unless you, me, Sally, Eva, Phil all go back, we take over. I mean, what's the point? What's the point? The next one up is going to be, maybe this time, Mrs. Continuity. I think it needs a root and branch.
Yep.
Eva, did that speech there from the First Minister, did that make you have second thoughts about being an indie candidate and going, I'll just go and vote SNP instead?
Well, if there was ever any danger of that, I've just noticed a tweet from one of his colleagues that put paid to it. You'll know Gillian Martin, MSP for Aberdeen East. She's the Minister for Energy and the Environment in the Scottish Government. So she will know that there is the fuel crisis and there's a cost of living crisis, and she will know all about the reverse wind auction, and she'll also have at her fingertips the numbers and the statistics for the value that comes out of the North Sea in terms of oil and gas, wind and wave power. However, her comment tonight was the headline in the BBC News: Irish government runs an €8.3 billion budget surplus. That's the BBC headline. Gillian Martin's comment about it: it's a small independent country in the EU with nowhere near the natural resources of neighbouring Scotland. It makes you think, eh? Well, you're right, Gillian, it makes me think. What it makes me think about is you've got a bloody hard neck, because small independent country in the EU, Nicola Sturgeon and Ian Blackford promised Scotland would not be dragged out of the EU, and instead of seeking our independence, they stuck on the side of a bus, stopped Brexit, and did their damnedest to pretend that they were trying to reverse the democratic decision of the people of England who voted for Brexit, as opposed to promoting the democratic decisions of the people of Scotland who voted for mandates for independence. Secondly, independence within the EU will not be possible if Scotland has free ports. Everybody knows that. We don't need free ports and we don't want them, but if we've got them, we're not getting back in the EU. Thirdly, independent Scotland will get into EFTA far more quickly, and it'll probably be far more beneficial for Scotland than even contemplating membership of the EU. And if I have to go on, no, Ireland does not have the natural resources that Scotland's got, but Scotland's natural resources are being jeopardised because we are being asset stripped as the result of Westminster control, and we will continue to be deindustrialised if the Grangemouth refinery is neither repaired nor replaced. And those do not appear to be matters that feature on the agenda of the Scottish Government or indeed of the SNP MPs at Westminster. So, Gillian Martin and all your colleagues and cohorts within the SNP, you get the finger out too and do something real about independence and about making sure that our country becomes self-sufficient and takes its place on the world stage side by side, hand in hand with the islands of this world, because at least the Irish are able to stand up for themselves in a way that quite clearly Scottish politicians in the main seem to have forgotten how to do.
Wow. Sally, I think we can take it that Eva was not inspired by Humza. Were you?
I was inspired by what Eva said.
Indeed.
Eva, I'm going to just nip across the border and vote for you, okay? Yeah. Hamza swallowed the gobbledygook. I mean, you try and listen, and it's just sentences that curve back on themselves. And I mean, even by professional political standards, it's just you really can't. You really can't. I can't stand it, to be honest. It's just mindless gibberish, but with a few platitudes in there to try and hook the unwary, but and all delivered in a very polished manner, and it drive you demented if you listen to it for too long. But Meanwhile, you and everybody in the grassroots is saying, right, what do we need to boil this down to? And it's the 2 million barrels of oil a day coming out of Scottish territorial waters, or between 1.6 and 2 million, or as Phil would found out when he got to the top table in one of the oil companies, it was $30 million of profit a day from one single company taking oil out of Scottish waters for over a 35-year period, you know.
Yeah.
And
there's dozens of companies doing it.
Dozens, and it's Grangemouth shutting, and the work and the jobs and the oil all going south, and the profits all going to the refineries in England, meaning that every single transport of food and goods that then comes up to Scotland will push the price up, and every single bag of groceries and every single trip to work will cost us more, and every single pair of shoes that you have to buy for the bairns or whatever, everything is going to go up in price because of that. And yet we're the company where the oil and the gas comes from in the first place.
Yeah.
There's that buffoon. I mean, he is just I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to use the term buffoon. It's not.
You can say
it's just an ineptitude on your part. You're a buffoon, and you need to go.
Yeah, they do. The clock's beating us as always, guys, so your next answers have got to be very, very quick, but there's two topics I want to cover. And one of them, two more things that the SNP are standing down from. You probably heard their climate change, big. Today, as Nicola said, today I can exclusively reveal by 2030 we'll be down to whatever the hell it was. Yep, they've scrapped it. And the other one they've scrapped, Lloyd, is juryless trials. They've put that back to 2028 before they're even going to test it out, because all the lawyers like Eva are going, go and fly a kite, we ain't taking part. Is there anything this lot can do, anything that can actually, we could sit in this programme and go, actually, that was quite good, because I can't think of anything.
There are two classic examples of you write a press release because there's an event about to happen and you want to look good. So she went to the civil service and said, and I'm talking about Nicola Sturgeon here, but prior to that circus that turned up in Glasgow that was supposed to be about the environment, but was very little to do with that. I can't remember what you call it again. COP, that's right. So prior to the COP, she has to make a statement of some kind that's going to get her on the platform. Because remember, she doesn't count in the world of COP, because COP is a United Nations structure. Scotland is not in the United Nations. She is merely the regional commander of a minor part of the United Kingdom. So she's irrelevant. She's not even going to be there unless they come up with a daft idea like we will have the lowest emissions in the entire world within a shorter period of time than anybody else in the entire world, despite the fact that we're an oil-producing country. We're tied to the United Kingdom, and whatever their targets are, the whole thing was guff from the beginning to the end. As for the juryless trials, that was a notion that was kicked around in a group within the civil service and within the senior cabinet members in Miss Sturgeon's administration. Now, the reasons for it, I don't know exactly. I have ideas about it. But what they had decided was that the law was their tool, and that when the tool of the law didn't work for them quite the way it did, and the drill bit fell off, and they didn't get the hole in the wall they wanted, they thought they'd come up with this brilliant wheeze of getting rid of juries, because juries are just stupid people from the electorate. What do they know about anything? They've never been elected anywhere. How can you possibly let them make decisions about who keeps their freedom and who is incarcerated, who is guilty and who is innocent, when we, the politicians, we, the clever folk, we should be in charge of that? This was about single-minded individualism dictated by a despot, and the despot's name was Mrs. Murrell. Yeah,
it's funny you were saying, go back to our first topic, as you thought that the law was for we tool. Goes back to maybe not, Miss Sturgeon, maybe not. Maybe your bum is about to get bitten. Eva, juryless trials and the climate change figures, what do you make of it?
Well, climate change is hypocrisy, standing the comments made by Hamza Yusuf in September last year when he criticised the British government for exactly the same thing. In relation to juryless trials, the pathetic running up the white flag by Angela Constance makes me rant like Lee J. Cobb in 12 Angry Men. One of the best films ever made, and if anybody ever thought that we should do away with juries, just watch that film. Not the remake, the original, and you'll soon change your mind. However, Miss Constance went from wanting a pilot of trials where one judge presided to, wait for it, having an exploration of implementing a panel system with 2 lay, that's non-legally qualified members, sitting alongside a judge. Would there be a name for a couple of non-legally qualified lay members? Perhaps not unlike jury. So we've not just put it in the long grass, we've reinvented the trial without juries to incorporate what are in effect 2 jurors.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard Case. Very good. Sally, the climate change and juryless trials. And you get the closing comment, Sally.
Yeah, the climate change nonsense was just window dressing, really, and they're not even very good at it anymore. Juryless trials, I think possibly the 2 lay person thing was a return to having justices of the peace sitting alongside the judge. I couldn't really see the judges wanting, real ordinary people sitting alongside them on the bench. That would be a little bit more unbecoming to their vanity and their station in life, I would suggest. So, but what worries me about them kicking it down the road and for another 4 years is that, I mean, when it should be just kicked out the window altogether, it's dreadful. It's an affront to common decency and justice, natural justice. Absolutely. But why postpone it? Is that to train up another, is that to allow some people who are opposing it just now to reach retirement age, while at the same time Stonewall educating a current batch that will then take their place in due course in the next 4 years? That would be my worry behind that. So let's keep juries. I like juries. When I was in the police, I occasionally did court duty, and I didn't see a jury ever not take their responsibilities incredibly seriously. They are it's a natural justice thing, and they're there for a reason. So no, we'll be keeping juries regardless of if 4 years down the line they reevaluate it. No, we'll be keeping juries. That's for sure.
We hope so. And that's it, folks. I want to do a Nicola Sturgeon here and go, I can exclusively reveal we'll be back next week. And I hope you will be too. And until that time, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.